I realize today that I have kind of a mission of healing, of helping you heal. And this is also the same thing that the Buddha had. He had a mission of helping people heal from suffering. And so I began doing this maybe over 10 years ago. It's been over 10 years. And initially people would come to me for physical healing. They would have 20 years of chronic pain and no doctors could help them. And they would, have been trying to go to different healers and all kinds of different medicine and drugs and things like that. And amazingly to me, within a half an hour, they had no symptoms of pain, to me and them. I was just as surprised. And so when that began to happen, I realized, I guess I should keep doing whatever I'm doing. I'm not doing anything. But somehow healing happened out of this presence, out of this awareness and consciousness, and being with the person, not just with the person, but not being separate from the person. This healing happened. Not being separate meant that I felt all their symptoms and could realize a lot of things about them. Some of them quite maybe personal, very personal, something that they had never shared with anybody. And some of the things that they'd even repressed themselves would come up as part of what needed healing. So that was the beginning of it. And then over time, I realized what true healing was. True healing is waking up to your true self. Without that, there is no real healing. Without that, suffering will come back in one form or another, which is what I witnessed happening with people, that they would be free of some physical symptoms, but then something else would come up, and they would come back and then would deal with that, and then something else would come up. So until we truly wake up, healing hasn't really happened yet. Physical healing there's just going to be something else. If you've ever seen people that have had cancer, generally they'll have cancer in one part of their body and they go through chemotherapy and operations and all this other stuff. And then after a while they have cancer in another part of their body. And then they go through the same thing and then there's cancer in another part of their body, or it comes back even stronger. Because physical healing isn't enough. Not at all. Emotional healing is not enough. The only true healing is to wake up to our true self. So because I have a mission for healing, I feel a very strong calling for this, I guess, and I guess this body-mind is used as an instrument for this. And it all fits in, so I'm perfectly happy with that. But I am here for your healing. And I know doing this in a video isn't as good as the one-on-one healing, but it's something anyways. It's something. And we'll see what we can do with this video to help you to heal. So the reason that I say that the only true healing is to wake up to your true self is let's look at some of the characteristics as best we can of what your awakened self is. First off, there is no suffering in it. And the reason for that is because your true self, if you can think of your true self as awareness itself, this is your true being. And we've done practices to help you realize your true being and come back away from this idea of a separate self and into this pure consciousness, pure awareness, which is what you are. This true being, this pure consciousness, pure awareness, has no suffering because it's not attached to anything. It's just aware. It's like a mirror. Something comes before a mirror And the mirror's not attached to it. When that thing leaves, then it's gone, and then something else is there. There's no attachment to what's going on. Your awareness is not attached to anything. It's aware of everything, but it's not attached to anything, nor does it resist anything. And in this way, no suffering arises. Nothing touches it. Nothing smears it or takes purity away from it. It is always pure. It remains always pure, no matter what happens. So as you can see, there could be no suffering in something like this. And that is the experience of your true nature, of your true being. So that's true healing. To come back to your true nature is true healing, because there is no suffering, no matter what's going on. You could still have cancer, but if you're aware of your true nature, there's absolutely no suffering. And yet it's not easy for people to come to their true nature. They think that they are this separate self, this separate being. And that's why they suffer. And so the healing, the true healing, is to come back to your true nature. And what I realized over the 10 years or so of healing was that the suffering itself, the symptoms of suffering, physical, emotional, whatever they were, the physical of the distress and pain people were feeling, those symptoms were actually a guide and a gift to help them wake up. In other words, suffering not only can be, but is, the purpose of suffering is to help you wake up and be free of suffering. It's interesting. The purpose of suffering is to help you be free of suffering. It's a gift. This is very hard for people to see in general, because we're always thinking it's so terrible and we're trying to get rid of it. If we try and get rid of it, we never realize that it's a gift. We don't see that it's a gift. So the first thing that I would see with people when they came to me right initially, and it was as surprising to me as it was to them, was that the symptoms of their suffering, chronic pain, whatever it was a gift. And then we would explore together to try and figure out and understand what the gift is. And equally amazing to me is it didn't take long for people to accept that it was a gift, even though they never had before. I don't know why, it just was. It just happened. And once it was accepted as a gift, we became curious and wanted to understand and open to the suffering and the symptoms in a way that they never had been before. And in that way, the suffering itself healed them of suffering. The suffering itself brought them into a greater understanding of their life and the causes of their suffering. Everything was revealed to them, and to me at the same time. It was like I was interpreting their life. You know, I was interpreting not just their life, but I was interpreting their true nature, their true being, which knows everything. That's the other thing about your true nature, your true being, is it is knowing itself. It knows absolutely everything. Far more than your knowledge stored in your brain does. It's true knowing. And there's nothing that you have to do to gain it, because it is your nature itself. Your very nature is this knowing. Your very nature, this pure awareness, is also this infinite knowing. So coming back to this is healing. And your suffering, the suffering that you experience, is first off, let's put it this way. If you experience any suffering in your life, and before you're awake, every single person does. If not in this moment, soon. It's just the way people are, because suffering comes when there's illusion meets reality. If this is illusion and this is reality, when illusion meets reality, and it always does, doesn't it? Because reality is always here. So illusion has to keep butting up against reality, and that creates your suffering. So if you're suffering, you know that you're living in illusion. That's all. You know this is a sign that you're living in illusion. If you understand it this way, you understand the beginning of the gift. Suffering is telling you that you're living in illusion. And also that you can wake up. If you understand you're living in illusion, you're much closer to waking up than if you don't realize this. If you think everything that you perceive and your sense of self and all that is real and true, you don't realize that you're living in illusion. Once you realize you're living in illusion, it's the beginning of your freedom from illusion. It's the beginning of your waking up. Until you realize you're living in illusion and you accept everything that you think and believe, how can you wake up? You can't. First off, you have to understand that you are living in illusion. And that alone is already the beginning of your awakening. So that's the gift of suffering. That's how suffering leads to freedom from suffering. True healing. True freedom from suffering. Suffering itself does this. So you can use suffering as the tool that it's for to help you wake up, instead of feel that you're being used by it. Instead of feel that it's something you want to get rid of, something you want to push away, something you wish you didn't have, which is what we do, doesn't it? Isn't it? Everybody that comes to me that has had chronic pain for 20 years keeps going to people, take it away, and they come to me also. Nothing else works, maybe I'll try you. And then everything changes because I see the gift of it. And then they do too. And it's all unique. It's all individual. Many people came to me with this thing called fibromyalgia, which is this chronic pain they'd had for a very long time. And you know, you would think after one person was healed from this, then the next person, there would be something in what happened, the healing of the person before, that would be relevant to the next person, but it never was. It was always completely unique to each person. So you had to be, the only thing you could be is completely present in every moment. Forget everything that happened in the past with all the other people. If 100 people came with fibromyalgia, every single person was completely unique and different. And the reasons and causes for it were completely unique and different. Which really creates a problem with Western medicine, which is based on thinking that people are the same in that way, that their symptoms are the same and they have similar causes, when in fact they don't at all. It's completely unique. And in order to understand the causes of somebody's illness, you have to be completely present with them. Absolutely present, because in that present there is the knowing. It just comes. It's just here. It doesn't come and go, because this knowing, your true nature, is always here. What comes and goes is your resistance to it, your ignoring of it, you're being lost in a dream. When your being lost in a dream fades away, then it appears that this great knowing comes. But the knowing is always here. The knowing is always here. And in my helping you heal, it has nothing to do with me. I'm helping you see your own knowing, your own healing. You are the true healer. Everyone that comes to me that's healed, they're the healer. I'm just interpreting them so that they can hear it, because they're not listening to their true self. They're not listening to their true nature. They're listening to their thoughts, and their thoughts are drowning out their true nature. They're drowning out what they truly are. So some people need an interpreter. And that's what my purpose is, to interpret their true nature for them. So they're doing the healing. They're doing the healing. And I'm, as usual, doing nothing. Just being an interpreter. Just listening. Just being present. That's how healing happens. If you could be present with yourself, with your true nature, if you could be present with your own suffering, if you can be present with your own illusion, your own dream, really present with it, you would see it as it is. You would see it as a dream. You would see the cause of your suffering. And from seeing the cause of your suffering, eventually you would realize that there never has been any suffering. That you've always been your true self. You've always been absolutely free of all suffering. And when you realize that, that's healing. That's healing. That's the only healing there is. That's true healing. So over the years, I began switching what I was doing into teaching your true nature, because that's real healing. All the physical healing I began to feel was pointless. I began to feel that it was just so superficial and not really worth anything, although people were extremely grateful. But I saw that this wasn't really what healing was about. Healing was about waking up. Suffering was about waking up. Illness was about waking up. Everything was really guiding people to wake up, guiding you to wake up. So to truly understand your suffering, you have to be open to it. Instead of pushing it away and wishing you didn't have it and wishing that you felt better, you open to it. It's kind of radical, really. It's the opposite of what we do and what we've been trained and conditioned to do, and what Western medicine does, and what almost all kinds of healing in medicine does. We try and take away the symptoms, when the symptoms themselves are the source and secret to your healing. Why would you want to take them away? But that's what we do. Give me a pill. Make it go away. Please make it go away. This pain is too much. Make it go away. I understand this. This is what we've all been conditioned to do. We want it to go away. I'm so depressed. I wish I was happy again. Give me a pill. Right? Make it go away. And that's exactly the opposite of why it's there and why it's a gift, and how to heal yourself, and how to be free of suffering. Ironically, to be free of suffering, we have to welcome suffering. To be free of suffering, we open to suffering so we can understand suffering, so we can understand what it is. To be free of pain, we open to pain to understand truly what it is. And that's our freedom from it. When we understand what it is, it doesn't bother us anymore. Some people have nerve damage that gives them chronic pain. It's a physical thing in their body that cannot be changed. You know, there's some nerve damage in the spine has created this chronic pain in their body, and there really isn't anything that can be done about that. You can use different kind of opiate painkillers, but then you just need more and more of them, because it's never going to work. If you understand what this pain is, if you truly understand this pain, if you welcome this pain so that this pain can teach you what it is, then you will be healed of that pain, because that pain will no longer cause suffering. It will still be there, but it will literally no longer cause suffering. And your experience of that pain will be entirely different. When you want it to go away, when you want pain to go away and you're pushing it away, that resistance is creating the uncomfortable feeling that you call pain. It's 99% resistance to the pain that's causing you the experience that you call pain. As soon as you stop resisting it, that experience that you call pain goes away. And what you have are sensations. Sometimes very intense sensations, but they're just sensations. And I think you understand that a sensation and pain are felt and understood in a very different way, aren't they? Pain, we just think of as bad. Go away. I don't want this. What's wrong? What's wrong? This is bad. This is wrong. And a sensation is more like, oh, there's something that's happening. It's just something that's happening. Is it good? I don't know. Is it bad? I don't know. It's just a sensation. But pain, we definitely say is bad. I don't want that pain. So it's a wonderful practice to have pain and learn to open to pain. I don't experience very much pain in my life, but when I go to the dentist, sometimes I do. So I don't have Novocaine so that I can experience the pain and work with it. By working with it, I just mean opening to it, accepting it. And what happens as soon as I do that? It stops being pain and it becomes a sensation. Sometimes a very intense sensation, but still just a sensation. And I can no longer say this is bad. It just doesn't feel bad. It feels like a sensation. It more arouses curiosity in me. Oh, look at that. Oh, what's it going to do now? Because it's always changing. What's it going to do now? What's this sensation going to be now? What's this experience going to be now? Because I'm not resisting it anymore. That's how we work with pain. We don't resist it. We learn from it. We let it teach us. That's what we do with suffering, with all suffering. We stop resisting it. We welcome it. We open to it. And we see what it has to teach us. Because what it has to teach us is fundamental to our very life itself. Everything you see in the world that you feel is bad, is creating suffering for you, is triggering the feeling of suffering in you, is a gift. Because once the suffering is triggered in you, you can work with it. You can learn from it. Forget about what you think is causing your suffering. Many people are distressed about the political situation in the world, in the United States particularly. And yes, things are going on that are not very good, to say the least. But when that suffering in you is triggered by saying, I don't want it to be this way, can it be other than this way? We have no idea what's going on. We're just lost in illusions. We're listening to the media and saying, Trump bad, or Trump good, Democrats bad. And we're lost in this story. That's not what's going on at all. There's much more going on than that. But when we open to it, we can see, oh, Trump is a symptom of a system, of an entire system. It's much more than just Donald Trump. We focus on Donald Trump and we miss the system. There'll just be another Donald Trump. If we don't change the system caused Donald Trump. And this system in the United States is a fountain of suffering for so many people and has been for a long time. It's why nearly 50% of the population doesn't even bother to vote anymore. They've just given up on the system. Which actually, for political parties, is something that they want. For people not to participate. That allows them to stay in power. When people become hopeless and depressed, it allows them to stay in power. So they actually want that. So if you understand this, then you know in your life you have something to do. You want to participate. You participate. You become extremely active in politics and social change, because that's the only way that the system can change. You do the opposite of what the system wants you to do. You get involved. But you don't do it through brainwashing and media control, including social media. You open to reality, to your true self, to your true nature. What do you see from your true self, from your true nature? What is practical enlightenment? Practical enlightenment. What does it say about this world, this dream world that most people live in? Well, it sees the real world. And in the real world, there is no duality. Everything is not just connected, but one with everything else. There is no separation in the world. This is an illusion. You and I are not separate. The reason that so many people were healed by working with me was because there's no separation. There never has been any separation. So I feel the chronic pain, if they have chronic pain, I feel that in my own body, because there's no separation. And I can be present with that, and then healing happens by itself. You know, there's no doing, it just happens. We see the world as separate. Almost all humanity does. And because we see the world as separate, we have suffering. This is the primary thing that you learn from opening to your suffering. That your illusion of seeing yourself as separate from the world is creating suffering in you, the experience of suffering. When you free yourself from seeing yourself as separate from the world, suffering no longer exists. This is reality. And it also shows you how you act in the world. If you are not separate from anything or anyone in the world, you naturally act with kindness and caring for everyone else in the world. How can you act in any other way? You can't. That's seeing reality. And when you see what we call injustice doing, and we all know what injustice is. Injustice is when people are acting in a way that sees themselves as separate from others so that they can create harm for others. You know? Locking children in cages, separating them from their parents. Immigrant means that I am not that immigrant parent, and I am not that immigrant child. I am separate from that immigrant parent, and I'm separate from that immigrant child. Therefore, I have, you know, I can without conscience hurt them. It's okay because they're not me. I can hurt someone else. They're impinging on me. They're trying to come into this country, and that's bad for me. That's going to take away something of mine. Or maybe I can get political votes by convincing other people that these immigrants are coming in, taking away from them. Separation, separation. I feel separate, so I convince other people that they're separate too. That these immigrants are separate from me, separate from the other people, separate from the good American people who are the good people who are grew up here and are not immigrants. Well, every white person in America is an immigrant, right? They're all immigrants. Even the Native Americans are immigrants. They just came over long, thousands of years before any white person ever came here. Every human in the United States of America, in this geographical area, is an immigrant. But we say, well, these immigrants came later. They're trying to come in now, and we don't want them to. So that's a feeling of separation, which is ignorance and suffering. Suffering for the the immigrant families, of course, we can see that. Children are in cages crying for their parents. It's horrible. But it's also suffering for the people that are doing that to them, because they feel separate. They're suffering in their own lives. No matter how much power they have, they're still suffering. They're not healed of suffering. They're suffering because they see the world in a way that it's not, in a dream. That's why there's suffering in the world. And people that see this, the more we feel separate from the world, the more we feel separate, the more suffering we have. And the more suffering we spread onto others. So there's many things on social media of people like spreading suffering. You know, there's also, you know, what we call hate radio, you know, what we call conservative radio. Has nothing to do with conservative. It's just spreading a message of separation and hate. Divisiveness, dividing. And this creates suffering. And you're suffering because you believe it. If you believe it, you're suffering. If you believe that Democrats are good and Republicans are bad, you're suffering. If you believe that Republicans are good and Democrats are bad, you're suffering. If you believe that immigrants are stealing your job, you're suffering. Because this is all an experience of separation, which isn't true. And this is why there's climate issues and pollution and crime and everything else. It all comes down to this feeling of separation. If we're separate from the earth, then we can exploit and damage and pollute and destroy the earth and its life support mechanisms. If we're separate from other species, it doesn't matter that other species are going extinct to us, but we're not separate. And so we suffer, and it causes great suffering for us by doing these actions that are creating suffering for others, because we're not separate. We're not separate. We never have been separate. I found this when I was young. Just, you know, everything is teaching us. Everything is teaching us. Our suffering is teaching us enormous things all the time. Very critical, important things for us personally, as we are. Our suffering is a message for us, teaching us. And until we open to it and embrace it, we can't learn what it is. It's the greatest gift we can receive. It's the gift of truth. And we're just not listening. And that's why we experience it as suffering, right? When illusion comes into contact with reality, there's suffering. And we cling to the illusion, so we keep suffering. If we let go of the illusion, there's no suffering. There's just reality. There's just reality. And reality is our true being, our true nature, and the true nature of everything. It's not what we think it is. There's no words or thoughts that say what reality is. Is it good? Is it bad? It has nothing to do with that. It's reality. It's not a dream. It's not an illusion. So language based on illusion cannot describe it. But we have to experience that. And suffering, if we open to our suffering, it can teach us this. When I was young, I used to, as a child, was always in fights, and I was very interested in martial arts and fighting and boxing and karate and stuff like that, because there were bullies that would pick on me. And when I was quite young, maybe like 8 or 9 years old, our baseball coach was learned judo in the Army, learned judo, and he was an expert in judo. And because we were being picked on by the older kids, I think I was in first grade, we were being picked on by the older kids during recess, he taught us these judo moves, and I was just fascinated because they worked. You know, these kids came running out and would attack us like they usually did. And this first guy that came, I flipped him like over my head. And he was stunned. He ended up on his back, and he didn't harass me anymore, you know? And I was hooked from that moment on. I said, this stuff really works. You can be smaller and defeat somebody bigger than you by using these judo moves. So I was totally hooked from the time in first grade, and then it went on to other things, karate and different things. But I learned that when I was in a fight with somebody, nobody won. It was really surprising. When I won, I felt I didn't win. I felt bad that I'd hurt this other person. And when I won, you know, when I won, I felt bad. And when I lost, I felt bad because I was beaten up, you know, and I was hurting and I lost. But I learned that when I won, I also didn't win. And that was a beginning lesson at a very, very young age of this non-separation. And this whole idea of competition. You know, I was very, very competitive. But in reality, you couldn't win because there's no separation. If you hurt somebody else, you're hurt. If you hurt someone else, you're hurting yourself. You see? I mean, it's a deep understanding, but life teaches us this. If we hurt somebody else, we're hurting ourselves because we're not separate. So we have suffering when we hurt somebody else. We feel guilty. We feel, you know, we don't feel good if we cause pain in somebody else. We don't feel good because we're causing pain in ourselves, because we're not separate. That other person is not separate from us. So throughout my life, life was always teaching me this. The greatest teaching was when I began healing people. Like, how can I know, you know, their deepest thoughts and memories? How do I know this? You know, I knew I wasn't psychic. I knew I didn't have any special powers or abilities to know things like this. And sometimes it would freak people out. But it was because there's no separation. There is no separation. We're all like this. We're all what we call psychic. We're all, you know, that's just a word to describe something which is completely natural. We're not separate from anyone else. Of course we know what they're thinking, what they're feeling. We call that empathy, right? Empathy. But it just means we're open to our true nature. Our true nature is not being so disguised by this idea of separation. Somehow it's this idea of separation isn't as strong in us to block us from realizing that we're not separate from anyone. I mean, it took me years to really understand and be my true self, be this true nature that's beyond identity and beyond personhood. Such a long time, with all these lessons constantly being shown to me all the time, just as they're being shown to you all the time. And your suffering itself is one of the primary teachings that are showing you that you're not separate from anything or anyone. That when you feel that you are, you suffer. And the more that you feel separate from the world, other people, other beings, everything, the more you suffer. Can you imagine the suffering that someone like Donald Trump feels? It's unfathomable. I mean, he feels so separate from everything and everyone else. Feels that he's the center of the universe. That's the perfect recipe for suffering. His entire life is one mass of suffering. And it's a lesson for you. The more you feel separate, the more you suffer. And the deeper you are in this dream, this illusion. The less you feel separate, the less you suffer. The more you feel a sense of peace, love, happiness that is your natural state. the more you come into alignment with your natural state. Think of the times that you've been happy, really, truly, truly happy. You weren't thinking about yourself. Happiness was just here. The times then you felt deeply, deeply at peace, you weren't thinking about yourself. You didn't feel separate. When you fell in love, you didn't feel as separate from that person you fell in love with as you do with others. That's the feeling of love. The feeling of love is a feeling of no separation or less separation. So your true self is in love with everything and everyone, always, because it doesn't feel separate. It knows it's not separate. It never has been separate. It's just its very nature. It's just its very nature. So I'll talk more about this because it's so important to help you be free of whatever suffering you feel, to understand that this suffering is a gift, that this suffering is exactly what you need at exactly the moment that you're experiencing it, that this suffering is for you, a benefit for you, the greatest benefit that life can give you. And in this way, if you truly can accept that, you'll open to suffering and learn from it. You'll open the package, you'll open the gift and receive what it has to give you. That's the beginning. And the hardest thing. It's very hard because we're trained not to do that. We're trained to say, like, we're conditioned to say, no, suffering, go away. I don't want you, go away. It's very deeply conditioned into us to run away from suffering, to turn away from suffering. And so in that way, we can't learn from it. But you can. I'll do more things to help because it isn't an easy thing to do. I've worked with many people in this, hundreds. And sometimes because the suffering is so, if the suffering is at its most intense, it's actually the easiest to come over and to accept and to learn from and to be healed from it. While the suffering is the most intense is the easiest and best time for me to work with somebody and help somebody. It's interesting. So in your own suffering, you can do this. I'm only teaching people how to do what they can do on their own. You can open to the suffering completely and see, what is this? Why is this here? And then you'll find out it's a gift. It's best to find out yourself. If you open to it, it will show you. Thank you, my friend. Many blessings to you.